I spent 2 decades dismantling threats with nothing but my hands and a clear mind. Now, I'm getting slapped with fines for a bird feeder in my yard. Life has a way of throwing curveballs. They see a reserved guy mowing his lawn, keeping to himself. What they don't see is what happens when you corner that guy, especially when you mess with the woman he'd die for. This isn't just a neighborhood spat. It's a showdown. And it all started with a single letter in the mailbox. My name is Michael Callahan. And if you think retirement means sipping coffee and playing golf, you've never lived in a homeowners association ruled by a man with a vendetta. This is the story of how my peaceful life in Maplewood Estates turned into a war zone, and how I had to dig up skills I swore I'd buried for good. It began with what felt like petty nonsense, but believe me, there was nothing petty about what was coming. 3 years ago, my wife, Sarah, and I moved to Maplewood Estates, a tidy suburban neighborhood in Virginia. We thought we'd found our forever home. The streets were lined with oaks, the houses gleamed with fresh paint, and the neighbors waved like they meant it. Sarah, an interior designer with a knack for beauty, turned our backyard into a sanctuary. Rose trellises, a stone path she laid herself, and solar lights that made the place glow like a dream at dusk. I took care of the heavy lifting, pruning, mulching, keeping the lawn sharp. Folks always complimented my precision, how every hedge looked like it was measured with a ruler. They didn't know that kind of discipline came from 20 years in the Navy SEALs, where a single misstep could cost lives. Trouble brewed 6 months ago when Edward Malone was elected president of the Maplewood HOA. The old president, a retired pharmacist, only cared about trash cans being tucked away. Edward was a different breed. The mid-50s, broad shoulders, and a stare that screamed ex-military, but something about him felt wrong, like a dog that growls before you see its teeth. He strutted around like he owned the place, barking orders and rewriting rules to flex his power. At his first meeting, he rolled out regulations that seemed designed to torment. Lawns couldn't be taller than 2 inches, mailboxes had to be a specific shade of gray, and even garden gnomes needed his approval. The harassment hit us fast. A crisp Monday morning brought our first violation notice. Lawn exceeds regulation height of 2 inches. $150 fine. Sarah measured the grass herself, 2.3 inches at its tallest. She was livid, pacing the kitchen, ready to storm Edward's house. I paid the fine quietly, which only made her madder. 2 weeks later, another notice landed. Our front door, a warm terracotta we'd painted when we moved in, was now inconsistent with community standards. That one cost $250. Sarah started a notebook, documenting every oddity. She caught Edward's new assistant, Linda Harper, snapping photos of our house at dawn. Then she spotted a camera on a streetlight, angled right at our property. When she called the city, they had no record of it. That's when I got serious. Illegal surveillance isn't just a nuisance, it's a red line. I installed my security system, discreet but top grade. HD cameras with night vision, covering every inch of our lot, and then some. Sarah found me in the garage one night, tinkering with wiring and a laptop that wasn't exactly best by material. She didn't ask questions, but her eyes lingered on an old photo I'd left out. Me in desert gear, standing by a sign that read Special Operations Forward Base. She never mentioned it, but I could feel her reassessing me, piecing together a past I'd kept locked away. Edward's behavior around me was off from the start. He'd stared during chance meetings at the community pool, not with annoyance, but with a strange intensity, like he was trying to place me. Once, at the grocery store, he asked if I'd ever served abroad. I brushed it off with a vague, long time ago, but his eyes narrowed like he'd caught a scent. Linda, meanwhile, was always lurking, her phone aimed at me when I mowed the lawn. I realized she'd likely seen the faded seal tattoo on my forearm, a trident, small but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. By the 5th week, the fines hit $600 for excessive yard ornamentation, targeting Sarah's bird feeder. She was at her wit's end, and I wasn't far behind. But instinct told me to hold back. Edward was probing, testing my limits, and I had a gut feeling he knew more about me than he let on. One night, as I sorted violation notices in my study, Sarah stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Michael, there's something you're not telling me about this, isn't there?" Her voice was soft but firm, the kind of tone that cuts through years of silence. I looked at her, this woman who'd loved me through nightmares and scars without ever pushing for answers, and knew the truth was creeping closer. The escalation came faster than I expected, a clear sign this wasn't just HOA nonsense. Edward wasn't some small-time bully. He was orchestrating something bigger, and Sarah and I were about to find out what. The clues were there if you knew where to look, and after 2 decades in the SEALs, I knew exactly how to read the battlefield. Sarah's sleuthing skills were sharper than I'd realized. She traced the mystery camera's cable to a recorder hidden in Linda's garage, confirming it was illegal. She also noticed Edward's uncanny knowledge of my schedule when I left for my part-time consulting gig when Sarah worked from home. It wasn't just harassment, it was stalking. She laid out her findings on our dining table: photos, notes, and a map of Edward's movements. "Michael," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, "this isn't random. He's got a plan, and he's waiting for his moment." Edward's next move was hiring HOA compliance officers, 2 goons named Vince and Kyle, who looked like they belonged in a dive bar brawl. They were in their 30s, all muscle and menace, with the kind of swagger that screams trouble. From our living room window, we watched Edward brief them and Linda, gesturing toward our house. That's when I knew we'd crossed into dangerous territory. These weren't paper pushers, they were hired muscle. The harassment turned vicious overnight. Dead roses were left on our porch, arranged like a threat. Sarah's SUV was scratched with ugly words while she shopped. Someone dumped rotting food on our lawn at midnight. When Sarah called the cops, they shrugged it off as kids. But I'd seen this playbook before: psychological warfare meant to break you down. Sarah started checking her mirrors when she drove, and twice she asked if we should move. Seeing her scared lit a fire in me that no fine could touch. Edward watched it all from his porch, smirking like he was pulling strings. I made a call that Tuesday. I told my boss I was sick, kissed Sarah goodbye, and spent the day tailing Edward. What I saw confirmed my fears. He wasn't just tracking us, he was working with someone else. I watched him meet a twitchy guy in a suit, who handed over a thick envelope. Their hour-long talk in Edward's SUV screamed conspiracy. This wasn't about grass height, it was personal. The attack came on a Thursday morning when I was stuck in a mandatory meeting downtown. Sarah was home alone, and I should have trusted the nod in my gut telling me to stay. I told her to call if anything felt off, but as I sat in a conference room, my phone lit up with her text: "Linda and 2 guys at the door. Say it's an urgent inspection." What do? I was out the door before I finished reading, but I was 25 minutes away in traffic. Through my camera feeds, I watched it unfold like a nightmare. Linda, clipboard in hand, led Vince and Kyle, dressed in fake security vests. They claimed an anonymous tip about hazardous materials in our garage, demanding entry. Sarah, always the rule follower, let them in here. First mistake, one I should have warned her against. They tore through our home like a tornado. They smashed Sarah's hand-painted vases, ripped our wedding photos to shreds, and stomped my service medals into the carpet. The worst was the backyard. They uprooted Sarah's roses, smashed her stone path, and shattered the solar lights with a crowbar. Sarah sobbed, begging them to stop. They laughed. When she reached for her phone to call 911, Vince smashed it against the wall. Kyle shoved her onto the kitchen counter, hard enough to bruise them. "Get it through your head," Vince snarled, inches from her face. "Nobody wants you here. Sell this place and go, or it gets worse." They pinned her against the fridge, towering over her while Linda recorded it all, grinning like a hyena. "This is what happens when you don't play nice," Linda said. "Next time, listen to the HOA." I made the 25-minute drive in 15, breaking every traffic law on the books. The front door was open, Sarah's cries echoing inside. Vince and Kyle were in the living room, debating what else to break. Linda was still filming. They didn't hear me slip in mistake number 1. Mistake 2 was turning their backs. Mistake 3 was thinking I was just some desk jockey. I moved like I was back in the field. Vince went down first, a precise strike to his knee's pressure point, sending him to the floor, gasping. Kyle swung, but his punch was sloppy, telegraphed. I caught his arm, twisted it, and landed an uppercut that dropped him cold. Linda froze her phone, clattering to the ground. I used zip ties from my toolbox to secure the goons, then turned to Sarah. She was trembling but unhurt, curled on the couch, the only thing they hadn't trashed. I held her until her breathing steadied. "Michael," she whispered. How did you do that? Who were you? I glanced at the unconscious thugs, then at Linda, cowering against the wall. Those people, I said, my voice calm despite the fury boiling inside, just made the worst mistake of their lives. They attacked my family, and now they're going to learn why my old team called me Ghost. Sarah's eyes searched mine, questions piling up. But the real question was why Edward was so fixated on me like he'd seen a ghost from his past. The answer would turn our world upside down. Over the next few days, Sarah and I dug into Edward's past, and what we found was colder than I'd imagined. With her research skills and my old military contacts, we uncovered a truth that explained everything. Edward Malone had been a Marine officer 15 years ago, my commanding officer during a botched op in Iraq. The mission was simple recon, but it went south when our routes were sold to insurgents for a quick $60,000. 2 of my brothers died in that ambush. Good men with kids who'd never see their dads again. I took a bullet to the leg, and we were pinned down for 20 hours because Edward's safe extraction points were traps. I'd smelled betrayal back then, but proving it took months. I pored over radio logs, bank records, and informant tips until I had enough to bury him. Edward was court-martialed and honorably discharged for selling us out. His rants during the trial were chilling. He blamed me, swore he'd find Michael Ghost Callahan, and make me pay for ruining his life. Sarah read the declassified transcripts, her face pale. Michael, this isn't chance. He's been hunting you. Our neighbor, Mr. Thompson, a retired mechanic who'd lived in Maplewood forever, dropped the final clue. Over coffee, he mentioned Edward bragging about settling an old score with a Special Forces hotshot when he first moved in. Sarah and I exchanged looks. This was revenge, 15 years in the making. Linda's reports, which Sarah intercepted through a fed-up neighbor, sealed it. They included zoomed-in shots of my tattoo, my daily routines, and Edward's voice on a recording. I've been tracking Michael Ghost Callahan for years. He destroyed me, and now I'll destroy him. Hearing my call sign after all this time hit like a gut punch. This had to end before Sarah got hurt worse. I chose the next HOA meeting to confront Edward, in front of the whole neighborhood. Sarah wanted to come, but I convinced her to stay safe at home. I spent 2 days preparing, compiling evidence, setting up a projector, and picking a shirt I could roll up to show my tattoo. The meeting was in the community hall, a dated building packed with 25 residents, and the HOA board. Edward ruled like a king. He was mid-speech about new gate codes when I walked in, projector in hand. Mr. Callahan, he said, voice tight, this is a private meeting. Submit your concerns in writing. I plugged in the projector and smiled, the kind of smile that makes men nervous. Edward, I think everyone needs to see this. The footage played crystal clear video of Vince and Kyle trashing our home, shoving Sarah, while Linda filmed. Gasps filled the room. When it ended, Edward stammered, but I cut him off. That was my wife, assaulted in our home by men you hired to scare us out. I rolled up my sleeve, revealing the sealed trident and scars that told stories I'd never share. I served 20 years as a Navy SEAL, I said, my voice carrying the weight of command. Call sign Ghost. I hunted terrorists in places you've never heard of, and I never failed a mission. Edward's face drained of color. The room was silent, every eye on my scars, then on him. Linda broke. Standing in the back, she yelled, he's lying. Edward knew who you were from day one. He said it was payback for something you did to him. The crowd erupted, murmurs turning to shouts. I let the chaos simmer, then spoke. Edward Malone was discharged from the Marines for betraying his men. He sold our routes to the insurgents and got 2 of my team killed. I exposed him, and he's been after me ever since. My demands were clear. Edward resigns, apologizes publicly, pays for all damages, and faces a police investigation. You've got 24 hours, I said, locking eyes with him. Don't test me. He tried to deflect, but his voice cracked, and the room turned on him. Sarah appeared at the door, unable to stay away. It's time this neighborhood knew the truth, she said, her voice steady. And it's time we decide what kind of community we want. Edward's response was desperate. He hired a lawyer who spun tales of my PTSD-fueled threats. Then, on Saturday night, he sent 6 hired killers to our house, pros with rap sheets and orders to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. I'd been monitoring Edward's calls, so I was ready. I turned our home into a fortress, showed Sarah the panic room I'd built, and gave her a quick self-defense lesson. "Michael," she said, eyes wide, "this is crazy. They're coming to kill us." I cupped her face. "Sarah, I'll keep you safe. Whatever it takes." They hit at 3 a.m., cutting power and jamming signals. 6 men, armed and trained, moved like a unit. But I wasn't a civilian. Using thermal scopes, I tracked them. The first tripped over a rigged garden line, breaking his ankle. The second ate a face full of fire extinguisher foam, blinding him long enough for me to knock him out. The fight spilled into the house, a brutal dance of fists and improvised weapons. I took a knife to the arm but dropped all 6 in under 15 minutes, zip-tying them as Sarah emerged from the panic room. She stared at the scene, then at me, blood dripping from my arm. "Michael, who were you before me?" I sighed. "When this is over, I'll tell you everything." She nodded, then sprang into action, photographing the attackers' guns and IDs for the police. Her strength floored meshed gone from victim to warrior. The police investigation was swift. The 6 thugs rolled on Edward, detailing his orders. Federal charges piled up: conspiracy, assault, attempted murder. His assets were seized to pay restitution, covering our damages, and more. At a packed community meeting, Sarah laid out the truth. Mr. Thompson spoke of Edward's reign of terror, and Linda, tearful, confessed her role, begging forgiveness. The crowd booed Edward's weak defense, calling him a traitor. Sarah was elected HOA president unanimously, promising transparency and fairness. The neighborhood cheered. We rebuilt our home, stronger and more beautiful. Sarah's new garden bloomed with lilies, symbolizing renewal. Maplewood transformed under her leadership. Meetings became block parties, and property values soared. Linda, on probation, became Sarah's right hand, atoning through community work. 6 months later, standing in our garden at sunset, Sarah asked if I missed my old life. "I missed the team," I admitted. "But this home ice worth every fight." Edward got 18 years in federal prison, and his betrayal was exposed for good. Our story spread, a testament to standing up to bullies. Sitting in our garden, I looked at Sarah, her laughter brighter than the solar lights. "Never underestimate the quiet guy next door," I said. "He might just be a ghost, waiting for the right moment to strike." What would you do if someone targeted your family? Was Michael's response justice or vengeance? Share your thoughts below. Let's debate violence, justice, and standing up to injustice. Your voice matters, so tell us where you stand.